In 1954, a fruit company convinced the government of the United States to overthrow a democratically elected president. Not a general, not a dictator, a president who had been chosen by his own people in a free election. The country was Guatemala. The weapon was the Central Intelligence Agency. And the reason, the entire reason, was a piece of fruit you can buy today for less than the coins in your pocket. This is the story of how the banana, soft, sweet, harmless, became one of the most powerful and most dangerous products on Earth, how a single company used it to own entire nations, and how the phrase "banana republic" was not invented as a joke. It was a description of a crime. But to understand how a banana could topple a government, we have to go back to a time when almost no one in America had ever seen one. The banana is old, far older than the empire that would be built on it. It was first domesticated in the jungles of Southeast Asia and New Guinea thousands of years ago. But the wild banana was nothing like the fruit you know. It was short, tough, and packed with hard black seeds, closer to a pod than a snack. Generation by generation, farmers selected the rare mutant plants that produced soft, seedless, edible fruit. And here is the strange part. A seedless banana cannot reproduce on its own. Every single one has to be cloned, cut from the parent and replanted. Remember that. It seems like a small botanical detail. It is not. That fact will one day threaten to wipe the banana off the face of the earth. But we are getting ahead of the story. For most of human history, Americans and Europeans had never even seen a banana. It grew in the tropics. It rotted in days. There was no way to get it across an ocean before it turned to mush. In 1876, at the Great Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia, bananas were sold as an exotic marvel, each one wrapped in foil, sold for 10 cents. In today's money, that is a luxury item. People ate them with a knife and fork, unsure whether the peel was poisonous. Think about that for a second. The fruit that would become the cheapest in the world began as a delicacy for the rich. And the reason was simple. The banana had one fatal weakness: time. A banana is a clock. From the moment it is cut, it is dying. To build a business on it, someone would have to conquer distance and time itself. To move a perishable tropical fruit thousands of miles, faster than it could rot. Whoever solved that problem would not just sell bananas, they would own them. In 1871, a young American named Minor Keith arrived in Costa Rica with a contract to build a railroad. It was supposed to be a simple job: lay tracks from the coast into the highlands so coffee could be carried to the sea. It became one of the deadliest construction projects in the history of the Americas. The jungle fought back. Malaria, yellow fever, snakes, floods, and exhaustion killed the workers by the thousands. In the first 25 miles of track, an estimated 5,000 men died. Among the dead were Keith's own 3 brothers. He buried them and kept building. But the railroad had a problem that had nothing to do with the jungle. There was almost nothing to carry on it. Costa Rica did not have enough freight to make the line pay. Keith was building a railroad to nowhere, and it was bankrupting everyone involved. So he planted bananas along the tracks. At first, it was just to feed his workers, cheap, fast-growing food. But the bananas grew beautifully in that soil, and Keith realized that the railroad he had bled to build was the perfect machine for moving fruit from the jungle to a waiting ship. The railroad did not need the coffee anymore. The railroad had found its cargo. Far to the north, in Boston, other men were solving the other half of the puzzle. A company called Boston Fruit had learned how to ship bananas by fast steamer and sell them before they spoiled. They had the market. Keith had the land and the railroads. In 1899, they merged. The result was the United Fruit Company, and from the moment it was born, it was a giant. It controlled plantations, railroads, ports, and ships across a dozen countries. It built a private navy of refrigerated steamers, painted brilliant white to reflect the tropical heat. The famous Great White Fleet, larger than the navies of most of the nations it did business with. Across Central America, people gave the company another name. They called it El Pulpo, the octopus, because its arms reached into everything. Around the turn of the century, an American writer was hiding in Honduras, on the run from an embezzlement charge back home. His name was William Sidney Porter, though the world would come to know him by his pen name, O. Henry. Watching the country around him, a place where a foreign fruit company owned the land, the railroads, the ports, and, quietly, the government, he coined a phrase to describe it: a banana republic. A country whose economy, and therefore whose politics, were owned by an outside corporation growing a single crop. He meant it as satire. It was not satire. It was a job description. In the countries where it operated, United Fruit was not just a business, it was a shadow state. It owned enormous tracts of land, often far more than it ever farmed, held in reserve to keep competitors out. It ran the railroads and set the freight rates. It controlled the ports. It paid little or no tax because it negotiated its own deals with governments that it had helped put in power. And when a government would not cooperate, the company could simply buy a new one. In 1911, a rival banana man named Sam Zemurray, Sam the Banana Man, grew tired of a Honduran government he did not like. So he hired a boatload of mercenaries, launched a private invasion, and installed a president who would give him the terms he wanted. It worked. Zemurray would later take over United Fruit itself. Let that sink in. A businessman overthrew a country's government to lower his own taxes. And he won. But the darkest moment came in 1928 in Colombia. Tens of thousands of United Fruit workers went on strike. Their demands were not radical. They wanted written contracts. They wanted to be paid in real money instead of company coupons. They wanted a 6-day week and basic medical care. The company called it a threat. The United States hinted it might send in the Marines to protect its interests. And the Colombian government, terrified of losing American favor, sent the army instead. On the night of December 6th, soldiers surrounded the strikers gathered in the town square and opened fire. How many people died that night is still debated. The official number was tiny. Other estimates run into the hundreds, even as high as 1,000 or more. The bodies, witnesses said, were carried away on trains and dumped into the sea. Years later, a Colombian boy who grew up hearing those stories would write them into a novel. His name was Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and in 100 Years of Solitude, the massacre of the banana workers became one of the most haunting scenes in all of literature. A truth so buried that it could only survive disguised as a dream. If you are finding this story as disturbing as it is fascinating, subscribe. We uncover the hidden history behind something in your kitchen every single week. And what happened next is the reason the word banana still makes historians flinch. Which brings us, finally, to Guatemala and to 1954. By the middle of the 20th century, United Fruit was the largest landowner in Guatemala. It controlled the country's main port, its railroads, its telegraph. It owned vast stretches of the best farmland. And here is the crucial part. It deliberately left most of that land unplanted, holding it in reserve while landless peasants had nothing to farm. Then Guatemala did something dangerous. It became a democracy. After decades of dictatorship, a democratic revolution swept the country, and in 1950, the people elected a reformer named Jacobo Arbenz. Arbenz looked at his country, at the poverty, at the idle land locked away by a foreign corporation, and in 1952, he passed a land reform law. It was, on paper, almost gentle. The government would buy back unused land from large owners and give it to peasant farmers. And it would pay for that land at exactly the value the owners had declared it to be worth. There was just one problem for United Fruit. For years, the company had lied about the value of its land, deliberately declaring it to be worth almost nothing to avoid paying tax. So when Guatemala offered to pay exactly that declared value, the company was trapped by its own lie. It was being offered the price it had sworn the land was worth, and it was enraged. United Fruit decided that the government of Guatemala had to go. The company had one more weapon, more powerful than any navy: public relations. United Fruit hired Edward Bernays, the man often called the father of public relations, the master of turning opinion into a weapon. Bernays ran a brilliant, relentless campaign to convince the American press and public of a single idea, that Arbenz was not a reformer, he was a communist. A Soviet beachhead 90 minutes from the United States in the middle of the Cold War. It was a distortion, but it was a distortion that landed at the perfect moment. Because United Fruit had friends in the highest offices in America. The Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, had spent years at a law firm that represented United Fruit. His brother, Allen Dulles, was the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. The company's interests and the American government's fears had fused into a single will. In 1954, the CIA launched Operation PBSUCCESS. It was not a real army. It was something more modern and more cynical. A small force of exiles, a fake rebel radio station broadcasting false reports of an unstoppable advance, and a few aircraft dropping bombs and leaflets to spread panic. The goal was not to win a war. It was to convince Arbenz that he had already lost one. It worked. Isolated, abandoned, and convinced that resisting would mean a bloodbath, Arbenz resigned. A colonel hand-picked by the United States, Carlos Castillo Armas, was flown in to take his place. The democratically elected government was gone. The fruit company had won. But the victory opened a wound that would not close. Guatemala descended into nearly 4 decades of coups, repression, and civil war. Before it ended, an estimated 200,000 people would be killed or disappear, most of them poor, most of them indigenous, many of them the very farmers the land reform had been meant to help. All of it traceable, in part, to a company protecting its profit on a piece of fruit. Now here is the final twist, and it takes us all the way back to that small botanical detail from the beginning. The banana in your kitchen is not just a banana. It is a clone. Every Cavendish banana on Earth is a genetic copy of every other. No seeds, no variation. A single organism grown 1 billion times over. But it was not always this variety. For the first half of the 20th century, the banana of the empire, the banana United Fruit shipped, the banana in the old advertisements, was a different one, called Gros Michel, Big Mike. By most accounts, it was creamier, sweeter, and tougher than what we eat today. And in the 1950s, it began to die. A soil fungus called Panama disease swept through the plantations. And because every plant was a clone, genetically identical, with no resistance between them, the fungus could not be stopped. What killed one plant could kill them all. Within a couple of decades, the Gros Michel was commercially finished, wiped out by the very sameness that had made it so profitable to mass produce. The industry survived only by switching to a variety that happened to resist that particular fungus, the Cavendish, the blander banana we have eaten ever since. But history does not just rhyme. Sometimes it repeats itself almost exactly. Today, a new strain of that very same fungus, known as Tropical Race 4, or TR4, is creeping across the banana-growing world, and this time it attacks the Cavendish directly. It has already jumped from Asia into the Middle East, into Africa, and, in 2019, into Latin America, the very heartland of the export banana. And once again, because every plant in every plantation is an identical clone, there is no genetic firewall anywhere to slow it down. What takes hold in one field can, given enough time, reach them all. So the most exported fruit on the planet is standing, once more, on a single fragile leg, kept upright only by scientists racing to breed or engineer a replacement before the clone we depend on goes the way of the one before it. So think about the banana in your bowl. It costs almost nothing. You buy it without a thought. And yet this fragile, seedless, cloned fruit built a private empire with its own navy, invented the phrase "banana republic," helped drown a workers' strike in blood, and pulled the government of the United States into overthrowing a democracy. The powerful were never really afraid of a piece of fruit. They were afraid of what it was worth, and of anyone, a president or a farmer, who dared to ask for a fair share of it. The banana was never just food, it was leverage. And the same fragile sameness that made men rich enough to topple nations may be the very thing that one day takes the banana away. The next time you peel one, remember what it cost, not the coins at the register, the other price. If this surprised you, subscribe. We dig up the hidden history behind everyday things every week. And tell us in the comments, what part of this did they never teach you in school?